Buenas tardes desde la Escuela Española de Historia y Arqueología del CSIC en Roma. Bienvenidos nuevamente a las conferencias de nuestro seminario Online Talks, después del verano, de que hayáis tenido unas buenas vacaciones. Como siempre recordamos que el seminario lo realizamos junto a Miriam Cubas de la Universidad de Alcalá y Harry Robson de la Universidad de York. Y en la parte técnica, aunque no lo veáis, pero está ahí detrás, siempre está Matteo Benati, que nos ayuda en todas las conexiones y en todos los problemas. Y en la parte organizativa, los compañeros del CSIC, aquí en Roma, que llevan las redes sociales, que son Esther Barrondo y Valeria Beolchini, y a su director y codirector, Antonio Pizzo y Elena García. As you know, this conference will be recorded by YouTube of our center, and you can send your question by YouTube also. Today, the lecturer is Giulio Lucarini. Hello, Giulio. Giulio is a researcher at the Institute of Heritage Science of the National Research Council of Italy, and the professor of prehistory and protohistory at the Department of Asian, African, and Mediterranean Studies of the University of Naples. Yes, it's okay, Giulio?
It's okay, yeah.
His research has focused of human adaptation to the environment and the emergence of food production between the Saharan regions and the Mediterranean Africa. And he is particularly interested in the study of lithic production and function. Over the, I think, past 20 years, Giulio has carried out intense research in different countries of North Africa, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, but also in Europe, I think, Greece, now in Italy. And he is author of the more 19 publications, paper, books, and conference proceedings that you can look for in the internet. ¿Está todo ok? No. Nos hemos descolgado, ¿no? ¿Mateo? ¿Mateo? ¿Sí? ¿Se ha registrado todo lo que hemos dicho o no? Vale. Ahora falta Giulio, que se ha desconectado, por lo que veo. Se ha desconectado todo, Giulio, ¿no? Sí. Sí.
Yeah, I think Giulio has some technical problems.
Sí.
Yeah.
No.
Here.
Oh, yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I don't know how it's possible, but my router just suddenly went down. So I'm now connected with my phone. Do you hear me well?
Yes, okay.
Okay, so let's try that the phone. I tried to restart the router if it works, but at the moment, let's try with this. I try to. So can I start?
No.
Do you hear me?
Now, yes. Yeah.
Do you hear me?
More or less, yes. Now it's okay, Giulio.
Just a moment.
Now it's okay, Giulio.
Okay. So sorry, I just hope that I mean it works properly. So thank you very much to the Escuela Española de Historia y Arqueología en SIC, all'Università di Alcalá and the University of York, but also the thematic groups Neolithic and Mesolithic Miscellany, and in particular to Miriam Cubas, Harry Robson, and Juan Francisco Gibaja for this very appreciated invitation to be with you today. So the talk I'm going to present is basically an outcome of two projects I've been involved in the last few years at the MacDonald Institute for Archaeological Research at the University of Cambridge, which was basically the Med-Africa project, Archaeological Deep History and Dynamics of Mediterranean Africa, and the Agrina project, my Marie Curie project, Human Transitional Pathways Towards Food Production in North Africa, Technological and Environmental Signatures. This talk is basically also an outcome of two publications. One is the From Lake to Sand monograph, the data published by Barbara Baric, Mohammed Hamdan, Fekri Hassan, and myself about the work that we carried out in the Farafra Oasis, and also by Cyprian Brookbank and my 2019, which was the main outcome of the Med-Africa project. What I'm going to present today also comes from really a very detailed analysis of C14 dates that were collected during the Med-Africa project, and these ended up with the creation, together with Michael, about the database and web application that can be easily and openly accessed. I invite you to play with it. Basically including all the radiocarbon dates from Mediterranean Africa, spanning from 12,000 to 600 BC, so basically almost the whole Holocene. So you can see here the screenshot, and you can use all the filters in order to select the specific areas. We could expand these also to Sahara and going then south or even north. Why not? I hope so.
Giulio,
yeah.
Scusa, in algún momento la connessione va molto male.
Just a moment. Okay, I try to move a bit. Just a moment.
No, soprattutto non si ascolta bene.
What about now?
Bene, sì, okay. Now it's okay.
I try also to keep my webcam off, so maybe it can save a bit. So the particularity of this database is that each date is also associated to specific economic and cultural traits. So what you can do exploring the dates is basically also seeing if these dates was associated to specific wild or domestic species or particular elements of material culture, okay? So it is really a very useful tool in order to detect directionalities, trajectories, movement of resource all over this very, very big area. So clearly, we have also in these all the reference list also that you can access the sources where these dates were taken. Here you can see the dispersion of the dates that we collected. As I say, 12,600. We have almost 1,600 dates from almost 400 sites. And okay, if you consider the quantity of dates that you have from the Neolithic of Europe, okay, this can sound really just a very, very small part, but this actually is what we have, at least from these huge territory. So actually, we collected everything. It was published. So all the radiocarbon dates published are here. So in terms of temporal framework, what these information, these dates can say. We have basically at the beginning this terminal Pleistocene called the event of the Younger Dryas. There is a slow rise in detected activity over the first 2,000 years of the Holocene that you can see here. And then we have a faster increase in the 8th and 7th millennium BC that culminated in a long peak sustained across much of the 6th and 5th millennium BC that you can see here. Then there is a prolonged slump in detected activity from the terminal 5th millennium BC that reflects a reduction, here you can see, in the archaeological knowledge across much of the Mediterranean Africa during the 4th and the 2nd millennium BC. Those millennia that we used to call the silent millennia. Actually, this slump would be even more accentuated if we don't consider two basically groups of dates, which are the pre-dynastic ones from Egypt, and also a lot of dates that come from Tel El Taba, which is this pivotal sequence for the Eastern Mediterranean chronology. Then the last point, there is a final minor upturn in the early 1st millennium BC that reflect an effort in order to date these Phoenician colonies, especially Carthage, okay? So it's interesting to note that here you can see, sorry, the difference of dates if we exclude the dates from Egyptian funerary context, mainly from the Old Kingdom, that really create a sort of a bias, but all the rest in gray can give us actually a pretty clear situation of the dispersion of radiocarbon dates all over these millennia. So from the temporal framework, some words of caution are also important, but also from the spatial point of view, because this kind of analysis reflect a lot also the strategy of research. So we basically have two missing areas from where we don't have basically any kind of radiocarbon dates available. So in some cases, these reflect the fact that there was a very, very strong erosions, deflation, but in the case of the Gulf of Sirte, for example, this also depends on the strategy of research. Simply nobody went there, especially in recent time when it was possible to get radiocarbon dates. So these are this is the location of some of the few sites, main sites where I've been so lucky to work in, and that will be presented and mentioned many times during the talk of today. So if we talk about the climate, which is the initial situation from the LGM, so the last glacial maximum, we have a very cold and arid climatic condition. We have this kind of steppe environment, which is expanding. And we have this desert and semi-desert that covers almost the whole Maghreb, and especially the Sahara, that becomes unhabitable. Okay, woody environments are really limited to the littoral, especially in this area of the central and western Maghreb. At the beginning of the Holocene, there is a return to more humid climatic condition thanks to the northern expansion of the monsoon circulation. More favorable environmental conditions that allow a repopulation of the Maghreb and the Sahara, starting from the two extremes, southern and northern, by these epipaleolithic groups heavily dependent on water resources, lakes and rivers. This affected a lot also the change of the level of the Mediterranean, and if this is not really very well visible in some of the areas along the Mediterranean African coast, possibly the area where this is really clear, very, very, very evident is the Sicily Strait between Sicily and Tunisia, where you can see how the situation, change from the LGM. This is LGM again, and then we try, thanks to the work of Augusto Palombini, to reconstruct also the situation during the 10th millennium BC, at the end of the 7th millennium BC, and at the end of the 5th millennium BC, where you can see that even if the situation became more similar to what we know today, this kind of insularity clearly could have helped a lot this kind of first trials of seafaring and marine connectivity. So we can basically try to divide this, long sequence into three main phases. The first one is the one of the early Holocene, the one that we call the Age of Snails. Surprisingly, even if it's the oldest one, is the best understood phase, most studied, and we know a lot about it. Okay, so we have an ubiquity of variants of hunting, gathering, and foraging life ways in much more clement environments. So this phase one in the area of Cyrenaica, Tripolitania, and the Egyptian Western Desert. Cyrenaica was probably empty during the last Pleistocene cold event of the Younger Dryas, and also on the threshold of the Holocene. It is still uncertain if it was occupied or not. The Jebel Garbi, which is in this area here, was also intermittently occupied, but its tiny size and the lack of properly stratified sequence preclude any certainty as to continuity. We have a new activity definitely from the 9th millennium BC around the Siwa oasis. So we are basically here that could reflect some kind of initiative from the Egyptian Western Desert, like, for example, from the Farafra oasis. What about the Maghreb? The Maghreb probably acted as the main initial driver for the renewed activities during the Holocene, witnessed across much of the Mediterranean Africa. Overall, most of the groups now targeted the increasingly well-watered high plains, savanna environments, and open woodland of the interior. Although these newly discovered sites such as Ifrioudaden, which is this one in Morocco, and also Hergla here along the Tunisian coast on the Gulf of Hammamet, argue against any retreat from the littoral zone. So these people used to exploit also littoral environment. What about the Nile Delta? Actually, we have, again, this kind of hunting, gathering, foraging occupation, but actually we have, especially for the Delta, almost complete absence of evidence. There has been speculation as to dense occupation of the Delta by plausible sedentary aquatic-oriented groups. But to date, we really don't have confirms of this. We have to say that the Delta is a region that has been really affected by anthropic activity. So really preservation of sites is really very, very bad. Okay. So what about the animal resources during this first phase? We have actually very good quality new data coming from Ifri Udadan and Ifri Netzeda in the West Maghreb, Kef Zuradi and Ais Misteheya in the inland Eastern Maghreb in Algeria, Ergla, again, coastal Eastern Maghreb, and again, Awaftea Cave in Cyrenaica. What we can say is that we can assist of a broad spectrum hunting, gathering, and foraging exploitation of the environment. Domestic species are completely absent. And depending on the local ecology, wild game can include these series of animals, okay? So except on or near the Atlantic, like for example, Ifri Udadan, marine fish are rare, even at the coastal site. At Ergla, for example, only lagoonal and coastal species were attested. So one of the main resources exploited during this first phase are definitely the shells, mollusks, especially land snails. We can find really vast quantities of mollusks that were eaten, whether as the seasonal staples or backups, principally land snails, but at Awaftea we have also marine resources. Although peaks in mollusk consumption are quite common also in the Mediterranean, actually the pattern that we can experience in Mediterranean Africa is really huge, is very, very high. Regarding plant resources, actually pine nuts, wild legumes, various kind of bulbs, nuts, and acorns in the Maghreb. There is a little sign of gathering and food processing of wild grasses compared to the Sahara and the Nile Valley. So these kind of wild grasses are mainly spread in the Sahara, but not along the Mediterranean coast. And also the alpha grass was used for basketry. Again, domestic species are completely absent. So let's focus on the Capsian. When we are speaking about this population at the beginning of the Holocene, of these, just a moment, sorry. When we are speaking about this early Holocene, early and mid Holocene repopulation of the Maghreb, actually we have a case for a local cultural evolution of the early Holocene Capsian tradition from the Ibero-Maurusian, where also we can get more dates. Actually, the research on Capsian sites that was done a lot during the 70s, but mainly according to the traditional approach. So there was this kind of differentiation in phases that was mainly done on the base of lithic typological approach. And until quite recent, we didn't have any kind of stratigraphic sequence available. So quite typically, these Ramadia, escargotier, these shell midges are the typical characteristic of these Capsian sites. In particular, these Ergla and Enchir Hamida in Algeria. Dukanet is a Neolithic site, but again, it is just to show you how these sequence are. So these are open-air sites composed mainly of terrestrial shells and sediment made up of altered and very homogeneous organic matter. Okay, very, very difficult to be read stratigraphically. This Capsian phase was divided in two main phases. The typical Capsian, that it is geographically limited to the Tunisian-Algerian border, occupation of open-air sites. We don't have information about mobility. We had exploitation of large herbivores, both Primigenus, Alcelaphus bucellaphus, Ammotragus lerbia, Equus, but also Gazella. And then, as we say, there is a massive exploitation of terrestrial mollusks. The lithic production showed the production of mainly blades for manufacturing large tools, and the technique used is mainly hard and soft hammer percussion. We have exploitation of ostrich eggshell. This is really typical all over the Epipaleolithic and Neolithic North Africa, both along the coast, but also in the Saharan region. As you can see, used both for the production of bottles, decorated, but also for the production of ostrich eggshell beads. Passing to the upper caption, it's actually, you can see that the geographical distribution is more diffuse. We have a spread on the Eastern Atlas and on the highlands of the Central Eastern Maghreb up to the eastern coast of Tunisia. Again, mainly occupation of open-air sites, and again, occupation of Alcelaphus and Gazella, and remains also this massive consumption of terrestrial gastropods. Interestingly, information about upper caption sites give us also very, very interesting data about the very strong variability in the funerary practices. Actually, we have presence of primary and secondary individual burials. We have evidence of bone manipulation. Here, it's a very interesting site, Faidsuar 2, that was studied by Laplace and then more recently by my colleague Luisa Udia, where we found some kind of manipulation. The skull was removed, was modeled using a sort of whitish paste. It has been provided also a bone dental implant, traces of perforation. So we have a very, very clear evidence of funerary practice during the upper caption. Again, a very important exploitation of ostrich eggshell, but here we can note a different kind of decoration, while the others were mainly geometric. Here, basically, we have a sort of very figurative decoration that can recall, according to my colleague Lotfi Belouchet, they can recall the ostrich plumage. So this is also something that it appears later with the upper caption. And again, also in the lithic production, we have a very, very clear difference with respect to what was before. We have the introduction of the pressure technique. The production of stools is mainly on the production of bladelets for manufacturing composite hunting tools. And, sorry, no, it's okay. I spoke about this very unique site, which is called SHM1 Ergla in the Hammamet Gulf, excavated by my colleague Simone Mulazzani. And it is very important because it shows really a very typical, very characteristic type of adaptation of these caption groups that were mainly living inland, also to marine lagoonal environment. In particular, this site is very important because actually Simone was able for the first time for caption site to evidence very, very clear through a very, very very well done excavation of this Rammadia to highlight a precise stratigraphic sequence characterized by multiple phases of well-structured occupations that are characterized by the presence of specific domestic features like pits, cooking structures, pebble floors, and go on. We have, as we say, presence of pressure technique, mainly from the site that we, at least Kef Hamda and Dukanet El Kutifa, probably we see mainly the presence of modes 1 and 2 according to the approach of Pellegrin. And it's very interesting because we see this from Ergla, the presence of pressure technique at the beginning of the 7th millennium BC. Basically, it's very similar chronology to Luzzo Cave in Sicily. Very, very similar chronology to Ergla. Actually, the chronology is so close that it's impossible to determine, I mean, the directionality north-south or south-north of these, I mean, of this production. But either way, the case for maritime contacts, I think, is pretty likely. So a very interesting thing, passing, sorry, to the phase 2 that can be considered as the phase with the introduction of domestic species, is that differently from the rest of the Mediterranean and the Sahara, the 6.2, the 8.2 CalBP event had much less clear impact on Mediterranean Africa, okay, at least from what we can see from the C14 dates. As you can see, we don't have any kind of, I mean, collapse of dates in that, at that point. Actually, it's aftermath that in the early 6th millennium BC, the dates display far more continuity than elsewhere. And I mean, what we can see that is these adapter, hunter-gatherer, forager lifestyles that could have continued successfully across much of the Mediterranean Africa. So basically, we have a very, very strong case of continuity. So, as I said, there is continuity, but it's also the time of the introduction of domestic species, okay? All the domestic species were exogenous, okay? So we don't have domestic animals locally domesticated in Africa. This exogenous origin was undoubtedly the case for sheep. We don't have, there are the wild progenitors like the Wadan, the Ammotragus lervia, the Barbary sheep, but domestic sheep and goat, domestic caprines do not descend from it. Wild bovids did exist in parts of Mediterranean Africa and also boar in the Maghreb, but there is no sign that they were locally domesticated. Sheep and goat were the most widespread domesticates all over Mediterranean Africa. Cattle was spread nearly as extensively, but in far small numbers. Cattle was much, much more spread in the Saharan regions, while pigs and all plant crops were largely or completely restricted to the two extremities, to the two edges of the Western Maghreb and Lower Egypt and the Nile Delta. So what about plant domesticates? I mean, this is one of the big points, big question. In the past, we always argued that the absence of domestic species from Neolithic North Africa was mainly due to the fact that very often the sites were excavated without flotation, without doing paleobotanical analysis. But we have to say that in the last 10 years, really the increasing application of very high quality recovery methods in the Maghreb, in Cyrenaica, Tawaftea, coupled also with the results of useware, starch and phytolith analysis on groundstone tools, have confirmed that this absence, at least to the current knowledge, is actually largely real. We have signs of native African domesticates, such as sorghum, but not along the Mediterranean Africa. They only come from the Saharan region, so Takarkori, Farafra, Nabtaplaya. So this aggregation in most regions, together with the uneven presence of other traditional features, such as the permanent structures, fixed settlements, and also pottery, where in some cases is missing, is precisely why the term Neolithic is still used very sparingly in North Africa. An example, this is the botanic assemblage that we excavated in Farafra at the Hidden Valley village. Again, wild grasses, mainly sorghum. Also, evidence of starch and phytoliths remains coming from the ground tools from Farafra, confirmed this presence of only wild grasses, mainly sorghum, and the complete absence of the domestic crops. So, passing quite quickly, you can see here what is the reconstruction according to the dates we have from the radiocarbon dates that, as I said at the beginning, they are always associated with the species. So you can track very well how species move. So you can have a rough idea. We have on top domestic cattle. We have to the right caprines, sheep and goat. To the left pigs. And down we have domestic crops. Presence in black, unconfirmed presence in gray, and white is clearly absence of evidence. This is the situation during the 5th millennium BC. And, sorry, I think that's, yeah, sorry, this is the situation from 6,000 to 5,000 BC. As you can see, the so-called Neolithic package, it appears only on the Western Maghreb, in the Western Maghreb, that it seems basically also in terms of introduction of domestic crops, the first area that basically welcomed this kind of species from the Iberian Peninsula. So actually even later than Lower Egypt, where you can see from the next slide, they appear, but they appeared starting from 5,000. So roughly the dates from Morocco are a few hundred years earlier. So basically passing through all of these, sorry. First of all, the first trajectory, the one of domestic cattle, that certainly become pivotal to a widespread Saharan pastoral life, that also considering rock art and residue analysis that include milk. We know this kind of groundbreaking paper published by Julie Dunn, Savino Di Lernia, and others, about the first dyeing in the Green Sahara during the first millennium, the 5th millennium BC, sorry. That was combined with ongoing hunting, gathering, and fishing. The case of an indigenous, of a local pre-7th millennium BC cattle domestication in the area of Napta Playa Birkisiba. This was a very, very long debate that now seems to basically not being accepted anymore. Cattle, presumably with their herders, so percolated northward in the later 6th millennium BC, but in a tiny numbers appearing in the Fayum and apparently at Dukanet el Kutifa in the eastern Maghreb. The identification of domestic cattle at Awaftea, which is this, is still not confirmed, and definitely is unlikely before the 5th millennium BC. Also, the domesticated status of bovids at Capelletti and Geldaman. Capelletti is in the eastern Maghreb, Geldaman is in the central Maghreb, remains equally uncertain even after the 5th millennium BC. These are the area where instead in the Akakus, the area in particular of the Wadi Tintora and the site of Wad Muhujaj, where among the oldest evidence of the exploitation of domestic cattle, referring again to the 5th millennium BC, comes from the Central Sahara. You can see here the figure, the location. So the second trajectory, the one including sheep and goat, they were previously domesticated as a part of the PP&B farming package in Southwest Asia. They first entered in Africa, presumably via Sinai, and appeared on the Red Sea coast at the site of Sodom Cave, and west of the Nile at the Farafra Oasis, where we have among the oldest evidence of caprines in Africa during the 7th millennium BC. While in the Sahara, sheep and goat were, let's say, adjuncts to cattle pastoralism, they basically are the main component, that they have a central role in Mediterranean Africa. They appear at the beginning of the 6th millennium BC also at Awaftea in Cyrenaica, possibly coming from the Egyptian Western Desert. And slightly later at Dukanet el Kutifa, and again slightly later again in the central Maghreb. So it's clear this kind of east-west directionality of the dispersion of sheep, domestic sheep and goat along Mediterranean Africa. We have here an example of the domestic sheep and goat among the oldest from Farafra Oasis, together with the one from Sodom Cave. These were studied by Achille Gauthier. So, given these, as I said, these early dates of the sheep and goat to the east, this phenomenon clearly show an east to west directionality along Mediterranean Africa, rather than reflecting a series of infiltration from the south, from Sahara. We have also the presence of bifacial tool in Cyrenaica that possibly came from the Egyptian Western Desert. This bifacial tradition was typical of the oasis of the Western Desert, and possibly they percolated together with the sheep and goat from the Eastern Sahara to the coast. Actually, the result was a string of a forager-herder society from Cyrenaica to the eastern and probably also the central Maghreb that lived by a distinctive, very, very distinctive combination of continued hunting, wild plant gathering, snail collection, plus the introduction of domestic sheep and goat along Mediterranean Africa and cattle in the Saharan region. An example comes from the site that we are currently investigating in the Eastern Maghreb, together with my colleagues Nabia Wadi, Lotfi Belouchet, and Alfredo Coppa. We have in particular the analysis carried out on the fauna remains by Nabia Wadi suggests that the initial domesticated component was very, very minor in the late 6th millennium BC, just a few sheep and goat, together with the wild game. But then, starting from the early 5th millennium, the numbers increase, and we have also the presence of domestic cattle and dogs, okay? For herding, we don't know. Together also with wild fauna. So we have really this very, very beautiful picture that a situation that is changing. Also, regarding the pottery, pottery actually from Mediterranean Africa, we have first secure evidence for pottery in Mediterranean Africa and even in Lower Egypt, which are early 6th millennium BC. Initially, it was used in modest quantities, certainly a Saharan trait, probably for plant, animal fat, and possibly snail processing and storage, obviously. Then it becomes more popular during the 5th millennium BC as herding became established and its utility for milk processing more evident. We have, again, this evidence from Dukanet El Kutifa that date from the late 6th millennium to the early 5th millennium BC. Saharan type twisted cord impress, comb, and slip decoration are in evidence by the 5th millennium BC in the Maghreb. Yet some parallel existence of cardial Mediterranean design further blur the picture. These are clearly not the oldest evidence of pottery in Africa, in North Africa. Actually, the oldest evidence come from this area, which is between Mali and Niger and southwest Libya. It can be dated to the 10th millennium BC. And it's interesting to know that they basically the beginning of pottery production in North Africa in these Saharan communities was absolutely not linked to agricultural activities, like is the case from the Levant, for example. But we have a presence of pottery, for example, in these contexts that are associated to the presence of residential hunter-gathering groups that were almost semi-permanent communities that exploited wild resources and started producing pottery. So we have a very, very interesting case during this phase also of marine connectivity and seafaring. We have evidence, especially for the Sicilian Strait. We have presence of obsidian. Interestingly, almost all the obsidian is from Pantelleria. We have several hundred pieces dated from the end of the 7th to at least the 5th millennium BC. We have possibly some later evidence from Kirkenes. You can see number 22, Kirkenes Island. It's interesting because they show the same reduction strategy as the local flint. So we are sure that they were exploited by the same people. Two sites presents the presence of course, the ones that in the map are highlighted in blue. And these are mainly, as you can see, coastal evidence, even if Dukanet El Kutifa and Kefamda, 19 and 20, they confirm that the presence of obsidian, possibly from Pantelleria, was present also inland. So is this a case of seafaring by African? Probably yes, considering the configuration of the coast, the proximity of Pantelleria, which is really, as you can see, very, very close to the Cap Bon, basically in front of Cap Bon, and then feature of the obsidian material, the same kind of exploitation. So the people of the Eastern Maghreb, with their links into Western highlands, eastwards into Tripolitania, south into the Sahara, and north across the sea, must have been some of the most knowledgeable and networked group in Mediterranean Africa. So what we think is that whatever they chose to do or not to do was really hardly due to isolation or ignorance. So a third trajectories of movement of the domesticates, the one in the Eastern Maghreb is basically, as I mentioned before, we have from the middle of the 6th millennium BC a full suit of sheep and goat, cattle, pig, plus varieties of wheat, barley, and legumes appeared in caves along the Mediterranean coastline of the Eastern Reef, in particular at Ifri Aden, and then also in the Tingitana Peninsula, El Kil, Kaftat El Gar. Okay, so we have presence of the full Neolithic package. But was it really a Neolithic package? I mean, let's see in the next slides. The location timing close match with the package of domesticates spreading around the northwest Mediterranean, clearly very strong connection, and also the chronology with the southern Iberian Peninsula. Leaving no doubts that this was exactly an aspect of a wider expansion of the Western Eurasian Neolithic that comes from the Levant. What about the posterity of this Neolithic? What happened after? The later 5th millennium BC sees the end of several cave sequences, as we will see in the next slides. This is one of the cases. This is actually considered probably the eldest evidence of domestic plants in the whole Africa. These lentil, Lens culinaris, coming from Ifri Aden, early Neolithic layer of Ifri Aden. Actually, the same chronology in the southern Iberia. Interestingly, even when domestic crops appears, as you can see, bottom right, even during this Neolithic, high exploitation of wild plants. So basically at Ifri Aden, crops remain 1%, even not 1% of the paleobotanical samples. So what about the fourth trajectory, Lower Egypt? We have a similar range of domestic animals. So we have this kind of Neolithic package that appear a little bit later, between 5,000 and 4,500 BC in the Nile Delta, around the Fayum Lake, a little bit later than in the Maghreb. We have a pre-existence of domestic sheep and goat introduced before, as we saw, over 1,000 years later, while cattle too were widely known further south, and both had begun to appear in the Fayum during the 6th millennium BC. We actually is not established whether new Levantine breeds of these species were now introduced during these waves, together with the first pigs, wheat, barley, and pulses. Incoming farmers from the Levant, or we have to consider an in situ reassemblage of the Levantine suit by local people, or both of them. An example is the site of Merim Deni Salama, where I had the chance to work together with Joe Roland. The site was excavated in the 30s by Juncker, during the 70s also by the German Archaeological Institute, and more recently Joe Roland with the University of Edinburgh is carrying out the excavation of the site. This is a very good example to give you an idea what I was telling you about the problem of the anthropization in the Nile Delta. You can see here the basically the map made by Juncker okay, the map where there are the 30s and the 70s also trenches. And here is basically what remains now of the site, which is surrounded by cultivated fields. Even in this case, okay, Merimde is possibly considered one of the most important properly Neolithic sites in North Africa, but even in this case, in the first two layers, we can see that the presence of domestic species is really strongly associated to an exploitation of wild resources. This is the situation of domestic crops, as you can see, during the Neolithic. So we have this area with comprising the Rif, the Neolithic Tingitana. To the right, we have, to the east, we have Fayum, we have Merimde, and we have a huge question mark all over the rest of North Africa. So why agriculture probably did not crack in? We have to consider a different pattern from the rest of the contemporary Mediterranean. Actually, environmentally speaking, there are no environmental barrier in the Maghreb, which is fully a Mediterranean zone. So if they wanted, they could cultivate. There is a lack of awareness, but possibly not, because in the Western Maghreb, we know, and also in the Nile Delta, we know that they knew and they introduced these species. It looks like that this kind of hunting, gathering, foraging rejection was due to this kind of a very strong post 8.2 Cal-BP event resilience, demographic resilience, this kind of risk buffering strategies and the low-level food production model that works very, very well in North Africa. Simon Oldway expressed very well for the Fayum, for example. This Fayum that is still continue to be interpreted as the first farming example together with Merimde, but actually farming was just a very limited part of the overall economy. Sheep and goat over cattle as a flexible small change as in the rest of the Mediterranean. So what we definitely can see is that unlike their equivalents to the north, Mediterranean and Eastern Sahara hunter-gatherers proved to be impressively resilient, both demographically and culturally. So we have a deterioration. I'm going to conclude. We have basically this phase 3 from that we identified from the 4000 to 1000 BC. I will not speak extensively about this phase, which is also very important, but is not really in the topic that we will cover today. We have a deterioration of the climate, definitely. And it's incredible because in the Sahara, there is really a very strong deterioration of the climate, but along the Mediterranean coast, the possibility to, exploit the territory and the landscape was still, possible. The environment was not so different. The climate was not so different from the other areas of the rest of the Mediterranean. So, but we have this evidence. Most of the earlier key site sequence fail. They just stop. It's a real change now in how these people lived, or simply it's a lack of looking. That's why we used to call these millennia not only silent, but also orphan, because, also scientifically speaking, they are in the middle between scholars who are very interested in the Neolithization and the scholar who are more interested in the beginning of the classical archaeology, Punic and Phoenician archaeology. So there are these 2 millennia from 4,000, actually 3 millennia, 4,000, 1,000, that are really lacking of information. So it's very, very interesting to just see what happens. We have the case of Altiburos, which is this in its early Numidian phase, dated to the 10th and 9th century BC. Actually, if we exclude an instantaneous transfer of this Mediterranean farming package from some of these incipient Phoenician settlements to basically non-agricultural indigenous societies, which were inland, we had to explain this phenomenon in a different way. We have the absence of domestic crops, also pigs, in all the well-investigated 6th and 7th and 5th millennium sites from the Eastern Maghreb. So in which way we can explain this? This kind of Neolithic that was transferred from Iberia, and it seems to stop here, okay, and it was transferred along the central and eastern Mediterranean, arriving basically 4,000 years later in Altiburos. But what about here? We don't have any evidence in between. And we don't have any evidence even from Neolithic sites that were recently well investigated with flotation, with the proper archaeobotanical analysis. Or maybe these arrive from somewhere else. So two possibilities. Actually, considering this new data from Altiburos, we can actually make two hypotheses. The first, expansion of Southern European farmers into this part of Mediterranean Africa, perhaps taking advantage of a thinner occupation than a millennium earlier, or a spread of agriculture from Egypt through the Garamans group. The evidence of Zinkikra, for example, clearly give us a very, very strong indication that all the presence of all the taxa coming from Egypt, so they could also be transferred north. Personally, I mean, both me and Cyprian Brubank, and this was actually in our paper, we basically opt for the first option, for the first hypothesis, also considering that the C14 dates for Altiburos are really, I mean, if not earlier, almost basically contemporary to the one of the Garamans sites. So, I mean, this is an hypothesis, and the very, very clear thing is that we don't have anything to the west. So summarizing, sorry if I took a little bit more than the expected times. Overall, of Mediterranean Africa did go down different pathways from the remainder of the Mediterranean, and to a lesser degree also the Sahara. On the one hand, these 9,600, 6,200, what we call phase one, is not really very different from the rest, except for this huge amount of snails. The main divergence is basically from 6 to 4,000 BC, where the choice of herding rather than farming represent the real backbone of mid-Holocene North Africa, with these two possible exceptions of Western Maghreb and the Nile Delta. This is clearly unusual in the other Mediterranean context in Europe, where we can see really a shift from hunting gathering to a full farming economy, but reflects similar underlying risk buffering strategies like storage, especially dairying, mobility, often is the entire groups that move, and the diversification of resource base. Strikingly, when the rest of the Mediterranean after the Neolithic, with the beginning of the Bronze Age, explode, become extremely interconnected. Basically, the maritime engagement after 3000 BC in North Africa seems really very limited. So some direction for the futures. Definitely we need more bioarchaeology, especially plants, diet, mobility. We need the more good genetics linked to culture, demography, and language. We need to target fieldwork, especially in the central Maghreb and at lake sites, because that could be also a case. I mean, investigating with the proper techniques, central Maghrebi sites that were, I mean, not so much investigated in recent years. Broaden types of sites investigated, especially open sites. This is absolutely fundamental, because very, very often we try to reconstruct the history of entire regions only on the base of what we see from cave sequences. And on one hand, this is clear because cave sequences very often are the only one to be preserved. But obviously, in the past, people did not live only inside caves. So that's why some areas, for example, like the Capsian sites, or shelter sites also in the Sahara are extremely important, because give us also a different kind of information from open air sites. And then more intensive survey in zones known to contain numerous sites. And finally, and I don't need to explain why, archaeology of North Africa matters in the present. Thank you very much.
Hi, Giulio. Thank you
for
your presentation. Miriam, you coordinate the questions?
Yeah. Yes, we have some questions. First of all, thank you so much for this really nice summary of the transition between hunter-gatherers and first farmers in the north of Africa. And I want to remind everyone that if you have any question, just put your question in the chat, and I will ask your question. In any case, we have some questions because Harry has some technical problems, so put all his questions on the chat. So the first one is, of course, Harry wants to thank you for this very interesting talk, and he wants to ask you some questions. You suggested that seafaring is likely to have taken place from circa 9600 BC. Is there any evidence, for instance, watercraft?
Very good question. This would be my dream, especially living and being from Bracciano, where the amazing evidence from La Marmotta comes, but unfortunately not. We have evidence only of obsidian from Pantelleria. Yeah.
Okay. The second question is, he also wonders if the use of ostrich shells are precursors to pottery in some regions of Africa.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I didn't have the chance to explore more this topic, but for example, I can give you a very direct example. All the sites that we excavated in Farafra, mid-Holocene, I mean, complete absence of pottery, almost complete absence of pottery, presence of the domestic sheep and goat, which are among the oldest in Africa. And we found a huge presence of ostrich eggshell sherds. Some of them clearly with trace of burning, so they were used for cooking. Okay. So absolutely yes. Also, they can be transported very easily without breaking. We know also from other evidence in the Sahara and also along Mediterranean Africa that the exploitation of ostrich was mainly for the eggs. It's very interesting because in Far Afra we found, for example, also a bone of ostrich, but bones of ostrich are really very, very rare to be found, because these animals were exploited, were kept mainly for the eggs. It's not rare also in the Sahara to find rock art images with ostriches that have the leg tethered to a stone. So definitely, yes, it could be used both as a bottle, but also to make open shapes for cooking.
Okay, so they use this kind of vessels, if we can call them like that, just for cooking, for transportation, and even they decorate, as you saw us.
They decorated, as you could see the beautiful example from Capsian sites. They used to make also ostrich eggshell beads. So this kind of circular beads to make bracelets, necklace. So, I mean, it's ostrich is really one of the main main resources exploited in North Africa.
And there is a continuity in the decorative motif that you can see in oysters and after in the first evidence of pottery in the region.
I mean, there is a continuity, sorry?
In the decorative patterns.
Okay. I mean, I have to say that very often the data we have, at least I'm speaking, we have presence, for example, of cardial in the Western Maghreb. We have basically in Dukanet El Kutifa, the site in the Eastern Maghreb where we are currently excavated, the pottery sherds found so far are really very few, and we found only one element decorated. In Far Afra, what I was telling you before, we don't have pottery almost at all. So, I mean, pattern, I cannot really feel to speak about pattern, but even in Awaftea, actually, which is this long sequence with the huge excavation, but the pottery remains are really very few and mainly undecorated. So what we can definitely see that is that the tradition is completely different from the Sahara, from the that is, I mean, in terms of decoration, it tells us a completely different story from the one from Mediterranean Africa.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question. Harry wonders if the practice of using eggshells as cooking containers was widespread throughout Europe, Eurasia, or elsewhere.
Sorry?
The tradition, if the practice of using eggshells as cooking containers was spread throughout elsewhere or any place.
I mean, I'm not really very aware of how it spread, but what I can see is that I mean, yeah, in Africa. We have evidence definitely in Africa, in Eastern Mediterranean. I don't want to reply with some non-correct information. So I'm not really very aware of if we can identify some kind of directionality and spread outside Africa.
Yeah, but there is a continuity in the use of this kind of containers with the apparition of the first pottery.
Absolutely, because I mean, it was definitely used all over the Holocene and even earlier, possibly. Yeah, definitely. It's not something that it's actually, the ostrich is one of the elements that keeps and characterize the whole Holocene in North Africa, both in the Saharan regions and in Mediterranean Africa.
Wow, it's really interesting. And as you well know, we work mainly in the Iberian Peninsula. So how do you think is the connection between North Africa and the south of the Iberian Peninsula? In which kind of direction, in which kind of elements we can explore these kind of influences?
So definitely, I mean, a lot has been done by different colleagues who work there and that explored very well the connection between the Southern Iberian Peninsula and North Africa. Two among others, I mean, my colleague and friend Jörg Lichstetter, also my colleague and friend Rafael Martinez Sanchez. So a lot has been done in trying to understand connection during the Neolithic. And as I was also telling you before, this kind of connection became also even stronger during the post-Neolithic phase, let's say from the end of the fourth, the beginning of the third millennium, when we can definitely see some kind of presence in, for example, in the Valenciana della Concepción mega site, presence of ivory, definitely coming from Africa. I think also ostrich eggshell, so definitely. And also the presence in Morocco of some kind of decorated pottery that more or less of the same period that can definitely be linked again to the Iberian, Southern Iberian Peninsula. We have to explore more about the directionality of this. What is African going to Iberia? What is Iberian going to Africa? This and actually, we are working on it. So I hope that possibly in the future I will be able to give you some more information about it.
Yeah, because currently, do we have some DNA data to explore the dynamic of the population?
Yeah, there was this paper by if I'm not wrong, by Rosa Fregel, published in 2018 that but mainly included many samples from North Africa. Is basically definitely something that it has to be better investigated. This area, I mean, you know, Miriam, this kind of chronological period spanning from the end of the basically starting with 4,000 up to 1,000 is really very not very well explored in North Africa. So we have this kind of absence of evidence, and we don't know if this can be referred to some kind of style of life. I believe that these communities kept being mainly pastoral communities, so we know about the invisibility of such kind of communities with respect to farming and agricultural communities, but actually this can be an explanation. But also we have to consider what I was mentioning before, that is really a period that is not so much appealing scientifically because we are a lot of us many of us are mainly involved in the transition from Epipaleolithic, Mesolithic to Neolithic. Then we have colleagues working on the beginning of the first colonial powers appearing in North Africa, Punic and Phoenicians, and then classical archaeology. But this kind of a period corresponding to this Chalcolithic and then Bronze Age in the rest of the Mediterranean, it's really not well explored, and it deserves, because the few elements we have really confirm that something was going on. To be honest, I mean, North African could not become suddenly, I mean, silent, and so we should work more, especially in terms of connection with the Iberian Peninsula, and more in general in the Western Maghreb, in the Western Mediterranean. I had to say that in terms of possible seafaring and connectivity through the sea, Western and Eastern Maghreb are definitely the two most interesting, interesting regions that could still give us a lot of information.
Yeah, completely sure. And we have another question on our chat. Beatriz de Groot, I'm so sorry if I didn't know my pronunciation, says, thanks a lot for this wonderful talk. Another question about the ostrich shells. We are quite interested in that, you know. Do you find a continued presence of this alongside pottery in later stage of the Neolithic?
I'm just thinking about about the site I had the chance to investigate, and I don't want to generalize. But if I think about, for example, Awaftea in Cyrenaica, definitely yes. Definitely yes, we have a presence of ostrich eggshell even during the late Neolithic phase. I mean, at the transition to what is called the protohistoric. We have these layers that are not so well investigated, and also we are trying to get some information about them. But yeah, in the case of Awaftea, definitely yes. We have also presence of ostrich all over the sequence from Dukanet El Kutifa, which is this site that we are currently investigated in the Eastern Maghreb. So there are, from Dukanet, for example, I showed this very clear double pattern of regarding the fauna remains analyzed by my colleague Nabia Wadi, that shows really in the in early phase of the Neolithic, this kind of small presence of domestic animals together with, big presence of wild animals. And then the contrary, because in the upper part of the sequence, we have really the number of domesticates which increase and the number of wild game which decrease, but ostrich remains there basically. So it's really something that it keeps being exploited. It keeps being exploited in Mediterranean Africa. It is like the terrestrial mollusks. I mean, they were there anytime. They were there even when domesticates were introduced. Domesticates represented only an addition to, but never a replacement of wild species, and in particular ostrich and land snails.
And just my last question, I'm so sorry. I don't remember, if the organic residue analysis of the pottery in the north of Africa revealed something like marine resources cooking or not? There is some data about the cooking of marine resources in pottery?
Of marine resources?
Yeah. I don't remember that. Because I remember the papers focus on dairy exploitation, and of course.
No, there have been many by the group, mainly done by Julie Dunn, the group of York. So definitely exploitation not only of dairying but also wild plants and also fish in the Sahara.
Okay.
We have a fish along the Nile Valley, definitely, but along the coast, the marine resources, I'm not aware, but possibly something is, possibly is my ignorance. So definitely we have, analysis that has been done from, we are waiting from all the analysis in the site, Awaftea and also Dukanet El Kutifa, Kef Hamda, were done by Julie Dunn. Definitely, we don't have yet the data from Awaftea. We don't have data from Dukanet El Kutifa and Kef Hamda, but we have not published. I can tell you that there is definitely no marine resources. I'm just thinking if there is a Neolithic site where they could have found something is Ifriudaden, because it's in the coast, in the rift, in the eastern reef of Morocco. So that could possibly, I know that Julie did the analysis on that material. I don't think if it's still published or not, probably not. So I think that if some kind of evidence of marine resources exploited has to come, probably that is the site.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. What's really, really interesting. Thank you, Giulio.
You are welcome, Miriam.
Yeah, I want only say congratulations, Giulio, for the conference, because show us in 40 minutes the Neolithic of this big area is for me is very difficult. It's very difficult, I think, to do conclusions with in this big area and few sites with a lot of information, because I remember I worked with George, I worked with Leonor in north of Morocco, and always is the same, is few sites in a big area, and it's very difficult to arrive to say conclusions, solid conclusions, not hard conclusions around the transition of Mesolithic Neolithic. Yeah, I remember only for me you are heroes in Africa, because remember your work in east of Morocco, Leonor and the people of the project of Auri Westmed in the west of Morocco, Lofty and Mulatzan in Tunisia, Lubel in Algeria, you and Egypt. It's only few people's work in little areas always. And for me, it's incredible. You arrive to do this conference and to conclusion, to arrive to make some conclusion around the transition of Capsian to the Neolithic. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Juan. I just want to say that, I feel that as the last one in comparison of all the giants that you mentioned, because I really learned a lot from all of them. So I try to what I'm very interesting, I've been so lucky to have the possibility to work in different places. And so I try to connect. I try to connect because, as you say, that the point is that we deal with a huge area with a small amount of sites, a small amount of dates. I mean, as I told you, in all Mediterranean Africa, all over the Holocene, we have basically 1,600 dates that probably Europe, when you want to investigate the Neolithization of a particular region in Europe, 1,600 dates come just from a very, very limited area. Okay, so this is a point. I didn't want to run the risk to oversimplify, because when you deal with such a huge area, you can run this risk to oversimplify things. I also clearly don't have the situation under complete control for all the sites, because as you imagine, the area is huge. But what I can say from the sites along the Mediterranean Africa and also in the Eastern Sahara, where I had the chance to work, there are this kind of common patterns that really tells a complete different story from what happened in the northern part of the Mediterranean. So this is a specific trait of North African communities, yeah, I'm just trying to link it. I mean, I really enjoy to work in different places, because this can give you really the possibility to have a general pictures. And but this was also possible because in the last few years, some of experienced researchers and scholars they really carried out top science in some of the most also remote areas. Mm-hmm. You have also to imagine. Sorry if I stress this point. I don't want to say how North African archaeologists are good, but I don't have to remind you what happened in North Africa in the last decade. So it was even difficult, and some of the areas are still inaccessible. And so, for example, my Farafra, which is the place where I started working and still remain my first love, I cannot access the site since 2014. So the general situation also pushed us to rethink completely our research agenda, to change place, to deal with a complete different geopolitical situation. And so on top of it, COVID in the last 2 years. So really, it was fun, but it was also extremely hard.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. No more question, Miriam. I don't know because.
Yeah, sorry. I will check again the chat.
I think
no, we don't have a question.
Okay. Well, for finish, only remember that the next conference, not is 5 October, is for Oliver Craig, because Oliver will do this conference in December. Okay, but this is for all people, if you for information. And the next is in 2nd of the November, and is the conference with Nicolo Mazzucco. But we will send for all this information. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Giulio. Thank you
so much to all of you. Thank you, and thanks to all the participants.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giulio.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao, ciao.